Avery Monroe had never been late to a meeting in her entire life. So when she stormed into the top floor of Blackwell Holdings, hair damp from rain, heels clicking with restrained fury, coat still clinging to her shoulders, it wasn't because she overslept or hit traffic. It was because her boss had summoned her at 6:42 a.m. on a Saturday with only one line in the subject of the email. Conference Room 3. Urgent. No delays. And when Graham Blackwell said urgent, you came. Even if you were soaked, even if you hadn't slept, even if your younger brother was facing a lawsuit that could ruin him, Avery didn't even knock. She pushed the glass door open and found him already seated, suited, coffee in hand, looking like the storm outside hadn't dared touch him. "Miss Monroe," he said, without looking up from the folder in front of him. "You're 3 minutes late." She dropped her tote onto the table, pulled off her coat, and leveled her voice into something that sounded vaguely professional. "I was on the phone with my brother's attorney." "Yes," Graham said, flipping a page. "I know." Avery's spine stiffened. "You know?" Finally, he looked at her. Cold gray eyes, expression unreadable, the face of a man who'd made a fortune, not by getting lucky, but by always knowing what people were hiding. He's being sued for breach of contract and theft of intellectual property. A junior developer who tried to launch his own startup using stolen code from a firm we invested in last year. Avery's mouth went dry. "You investigated him?" "I had someone do it the moment you started acting, distracted." He stood, walked slowly to the head of the table, like a king preparing to make his move. "What I found was unfortunate and personal, so I'll keep this simple." Avery's heart slammed in her chest. She hated the way he talked, measured, careful, like nothing in the world could surprise him. "You want something," she said flatly. "Otherwise, you wouldn't have told me all this." "Correct," he said. "I want a wife." She blinked. Actually blinked. "Excuse me?" Graham Blackwell folded his arms and said the words like he was negotiating a merger. "I want you to marry me. Legally, publicly, for 12 months. Avery stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or slap him. "Is this some kind of sick power move?" "It's business," he replied. "Our PR took a hit after the Wilcox acquisition. Investors are nervous. Rumors about my instability aren't helping. My board wants a softened image. They want a narrative." He took a step closer. "They want a wife." She was speechless. He continued, as calm as if he were reading stock reports. "You're discreet, smart. You know this company better than anyone. You photograph well. You're not some 19-year-old influencer I'd have to pretend to respect." "Wow," Avery said, folding her arms. "Keep the compliments coming." Graham's eyes didn't flinch. "In return, I'll have your brother's charges dropped within 3 weeks. The plaintiff is connected to my board. I can make it disappear." Silence. Just the sound of rain against glass and her breath catching. "So you want me to be your corporate beard," she said, her voice low. "For image, for control, and in exchange, you'll save my brother." "It's mutually beneficial," Graham said. "I protect my empire. You protect your family." Avery laughed sharp, humorless. "You are absolutely out of your mind." "Perhaps." He handed her a document, a full proposal, bullet points, contract terms, asset clauses. "You'd receive full spousal benefits during the duration of the marriage," he added. "Salary increase, company shares, a new apartment yours to keep when it ends, no physical relationship required." Avery's fingers curled around the edge of the table. "And what happens if I say no?" Graham looked at her evenly. Then I wish your brother the best in federal court. She left the room without another word. But the proposal stayed with her. For the rest of the day, through 2 phone calls with lawyers, through a voicemail from her brother saying, "I swear I didn't mean to Avery, I was just trying to get ahead." Through the sound of her mother crying, quietly, in the background. And by midnight, she was sitting on her apartment floor, contract spread out in front of her, staring at the fine print. 12 months. Fake smiles, paparazzi, carefully staged interviews, and Graham Blackwell, the man who saw everything and revealed nothing. She signed the contract at 12:47 a.m. No emotion, no drama, just ink on paper and a future she no longer recognized. The contract was airtight. 12 months. No physical intimacy. No public disagreements. No sharing of real personal details unless scripted. And most importantly, no blurring the line between business and emotion. Avery had reviewed it 3 times before she signed. Graham Blackwell didn't do messy. He didn't do feelings. This was about optics, control, and mutual benefit, nothing more. So when he slipped his hand around her waist at the first gala they attended as husband and wife and leaned in close enough for his breath to graze her neck, she told herself it was just for the cameras. "Smile," he murmured. "They're watching." She smiled. Perfectly. But inside, her spine stiffened at how easily he wore this role, as if he'd done it before, as if it came naturally. It wasn't the only time he broke the rules. A week later, he came by her apartment unannounced at nearly midnight. She opened the door in a t-shirt and shorts, startled. "Is something wrong?" The press caught wind that we weren't living together full-time. He stepped inside like he owned the floor. "I had the guest room at my penthouse prepared. You'll move in tomorrow." Avery crossed her arms. "I thought you said separate residences were fine." "They were," he said, pouring himself a glass of water from her fridge. "Until our 3rd largest shareholder's wife asked why you weren't wearing one of my old sweatshirts in your Instagram stories." "You follow my Instagram?" "No," he replied, "but the internet does." She hated how calm he always was. How controlled. How unbothered. "So now I live with you." "Correct." "In your penthouse." "Correct." "And we're still pretending this is just business." He looked at her, really looked. "That depends on you, Mrs. Blackwell." The penthouse was absurd. Floor-to-ceiling windows, skyline views, a kitchen too clean to be used, and a master bathroom the size of her childhood bedroom. Her guest room was decorated in muted tones of gray and deep blue, with fresh linens and books stacked carefully on the nightstand. All first editions. All expensive. She unpacked in silence, every movement echoing with disbelief. She wasn't just in his world now. She was center stage in it. For the next few weeks, everything became a performance. Photo shoots, magazine interviews, soft smiles in front of cameras, staged glimpses of domestic bliss for his PR team to leak to Page 6. And through it all, Graham played the part perfectly. Hand on her lower back at the perfect moment. A small kiss on the cheek in front of a journalist. A knowing look during board meetings, like she was more than just a legal arrangement. It was maddening, because she knew what this was. He'd made it clear. And yet, "Do you ever wonder," she asked him once, late one night on the rooftop, "what would have happened if this was real?" He didn't look at her. He just took a sip of his drink. Would have been a terrible idea, he said. Why? Because I don't do feelings, Avery, and you don't do losing control. She stared at him, wind in her hair, the city glowing beneath them. That's not true. Isn't it? He looked at her, then eyes sharp, cold, but something behind them flickering like a warning. Don't make the mistake of wanting more than what we agreed on. Then stop acting like it's more. But he didn't. That was the problem. He started texting her just because. Started learning how she liked her coffee. Started brushing her shoulder lightly when they passed in the hallway, like a reflex. And then there was the piano. One night, she found him sitting alone in the dark, playing something soft and unfamiliar, a melody that felt like regret wrapped in silk. I didn't know you played, she said quietly. He didn't turn. I don't, not anymore. She didn't ask what happened. She just listened. And when he finally stopped, he looked up and said something she hadn't expected. You calm the noise in my head. She told herself not to read into it. Told herself it was just another script, another strategic line for the illusion. But her heart didn't get the memo. Avery wasn't sure when she started wanting the lie to be real. Maybe it was the night he came home late from a meeting and left a croissant on her nightstand still warm, her favorite, no note. Maybe it was when he told a reporter she was the smartest woman he'd ever met and didn't flinch when he said it. Maybe it was just the way he looked at her sometimes, when no one else was in the room. Like he saw something he didn't expect to find. Like he didn't want to stop looking. But the problem with falling for a lie is you're never sure when the acting ends. And one night, in the back of a town car, as they returned from a charity event where she'd played the perfect wife for 5 straight hours, Graham leaned in too close. His hand grazed her knee. Slowly, deliberately. We should stop pretending it's not getting harder to fake this, he said. Avery didn't move. Didn't blink. Her voice came out softer than she intended. Are you saying you want to change the terms? He looked at her like a man choosing his next move in a game he already knew how to win. I'm saying, maybe they were never realistic. They were scheduled to appear at the Blackwell Foundation's Winter Gala, an annual event that felt more like a royal coronation than a charity function. Journalists. Cameras. CEOs. Politicians dressed like movie stars. Every year Graham arrived with a different woman on his arm, none of whom ever returned the next year. But this year he had a wife. Avery wore a black velvet gown, high neckline, bare back. Her makeup was sharper than usual, her lipstick bold. She looked like someone who didn't flinch, someone born into this world, not pushed into it by a contract. Graham hadn't said anything when she descended the stairs of the penthouse that night. He just stared at her. No smirk, no flirtation. Just something still, like he was memorizing her. Is it too much? She asked, adjusting the earrings. He shook his head once. No, it's exactly right. The car ride was quiet. Not tense, just charged. Avery focused on the city lights outside. Graham sat beside her, unmoving, his fingers grazing the seam of her gown as if by accident. He didn't speak until they pulled into the marble driveway of the venue. Tonight will be the biggest test of the contract so far, he said. I've studied the talking points. I'm ready. I'm not worried about the press, he murmured. I'm worried about you. She turned to him, brows raised. Me? You're starting to make this too believable. Avery's breath caught. Isn't that the point? No, he said softly. The point was to convince them, not me. Inside the ballroom, they were flawless. They danced, smiled. She whispered something in his ear that made him laugh, actually laugh, not his usual tight-lipped smirk. People noticed. They always did. But tonight, they noticed something different. This didn't look like strategy. It didn't look staged. It looked like a man in love with his wife. Halfway through the evening, Graham pulled her toward a balcony for air. The crowd had grown suffocating. Champagne, perfume, questions. Out there, beneath the string lights and silence, he loosened his tie and leaned on the railing. Avery stood beside him, arms crossed against the cold. "You're quieter than usual," she said. "I've been watching you." She laughed lightly. "Creepy." "Factual," he replied. "You're different here than you are in meetings, or even in the penthouse." "Different how?" "Lighter." She hesitated. "Maybe I forgot I was allowed to be." Graham turned to her, slow, deliberate. "Why did you really sign the contract?" Avery blinked. "I told you my brother." "No," he said, stepping closer. "That's why you agreed. But why did you really say yes to being my wife?" Her throat tightened. Because she knew the answer. But saying it would break something open between them that couldn't be closed again. "Because I wanted to see what it felt like," she said finally. "To be wanted, to be chosen, even if it wasn't real." His jaw flexed. A muscle ticked in his temple. "You don't think I see you?" he asked, voice low. "I think you see what you need me to be," she replied, "not who I actually am." "And what if I want both?" Silence fell between them, thick as fog. She should have walked away. Should have told him this was crossing lines. Neither of them could afford to blur. But instead, she kissed him. Not out of passion, not out of lust, but out of something deeper. Something aching and old and terrifyingly tender. He didn't pull back. He held her face like she was breakable and kissed her like he'd been waiting years for permission. When they broke apart, Avery's eyes stayed closed a moment too long. "We're breaking the contract," she whispered. "I think we broke it the night you moved in," he said. After the gala, neither of them mentioned it again. But everything changed. The way he looked at her during breakfast, like she was a choice he'd make again, even without the pressure. The way she paused when he walked past her like her body wanted something, her brain still called dangerous. The way he stopped pretending he didn't care where she was, what time she got home, who she texted. It was no longer a partnership. It was becoming something else. One morning, Avery found a new key on the kitchen counter. Next to it, a note in his handwriting. "If this ever stops feeling safe, walk away. But if it starts feeling real, stay." No name, no explanation. She didn't touch the key for hours. Then she slipped it into her purse like a secret she wasn't ready to use. What Graham didn't know, what no one knew, was that Avery had stopped thinking about the contract weeks ago. She didn't lie awake anymore, trying to remember what page held what clause. She didn't calculate her smiles. She didn't rehearse. She just existed, in his space, in his orbit. And it was terrifying. Because he was never supposed to feel like home. And yet, sometimes, when he looked at her like she was the last real thing in his world, she believed him. The problem wasn't that Avery had fallen for him. The problem was that she wasn't sure when it had happened. There hadn't been a single moment, no lightning strike or cinematic kiss that marked the before and after. No, you only realized it when it was too late, like noticing your lungs have been burning after running towards something you shouldn't have chased. She woke up one morning in his penthouse, sunlight leaking through floor-to-ceiling windows, and found his shirt draped over the foot of the bed instead of hers. He was already gone an early meeting, no doubt, but the scent of his cologne still clung to the room. Her fingers brushed the shirt as she sat up, and the feeling hit her like a punch. This isn't temporary anymore. Not for her. They still hadn't crossed the final line, not physically, not entirely. The kiss on the balcony had been the closest. Either of them had come to breaking everything open. But emotionally, the contract was in shreds. That night, she made the mistake of rereading the terms. It was just supposed to be a formality, a reminder of why she was here, why none of this should hurt. Clause 3.1. No romantic entanglements or behaviors that imply authenticity beyond the public image. Clause 5.4. This arrangement will be terminated if either party is found to have formed an emotional dependency on the other. And right there in stark black ink, neither party shall express or pursue emotional attachment. This agreement is strictly transactional. Avery let out a bitter laugh. Transactional. She whispered aloud to the empty penthouse. And yet last week, Graham had stopped in the middle of a conversation with his executive team to text her, "Are you okay? You looked off this morning." He never asked things like that. And it wasn't for the press. She hadn't even been seen that day. Later that evening, he found her sitting on the window ledge in his office, legs curled under her, staring at the city like it might offer answers. "You're reading the contract again," he said. She didn't deny it. "It's all starting to feel like a countdown." Graham leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. To what? To the end. Silence. Then he stepped closer. "Do you want it to end?" She looked at him, really looked. The man everyone feared in boardrooms. The man who never blinked under pressure. The man who could destroy lives with a phone call, and yet here he was, waiting for her answer like it might destroy him. "I don't know what I want," she said, voice breaking. "That's a lie," he said gently. She swallowed hard. "I want it to be real." He didn't flinch, didn't smile, just took one step closer. "Then stop acting like it's not." But that was the problem. Wanting it to be real didn't make it safe. Wanting it didn't undo the fact that it had started as a transaction. That she had signed away her heart in exchange for her brother's freedom. And now? Now it wasn't clear what belonged to who anymore. The cracks began to show when the media got wind of something they weren't prepared for. A tabloid headline, bold and damning. "Fake love? Sources say Blackwell marriage might be a PR move." Avery froze when she saw it. The photo showed them laughing, actually laughing at a charity event. It had looked too perfect, too effortless, too real to be real. She brought the article to Graham that morning, tossing it on the marble island as he poured his coffee. "What do we do?" He read it once, then again, calm, calculating. "We wait. We don't react. Silence is credibility." "So we pretend harder?" He looked up at her then, and something in his face softened. "No, we just keep showing them what they already see." She blinked. "And what is that?" A man in love with his wife. Later that night, as they sat side by side on the couch, her head on his shoulder, the news segment looping silently in the background, she asked without looking, "Do you ever wish we hadn't signed it?" He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "Yes, every day." Her heart clenched. "Then why don't you tear it up?" He exhaled. "Because you didn't fall for me, Avery. You fell for the version of me I created for this contract, the one who knows when to touch your back at a gala, the one who leaves your coffee just the way you like it, the one who looks at you like you're everything because I need the world to believe you are. And if I say I believe it too? He turned slowly, hand brushing her cheek. Then I'd have to ask you something dangerous. What? What if we stopped pretending? She couldn't sleep that night. Not because of the press. Not because of fear. But because her heart was no longer following the rules. It was breaking in silence. Breaking in stillness. Breaking because somewhere in this beautifully constructed lie, she'd started believing in it more than he was ready to. And that was the risk no contract had ever accounted for. The moment love entered the room, every clause became a ticking bomb. Avery used to know herself in numbers. Deadlines, deliverables, billable hours. Her days were measured in precision, emails answered, crises averted, meetings navigated without a wrinkle in her voice. She had been sharp, calculated, self-contained. Now, she caught herself pausing to watch how Graham stirred his coffee. As if there were a story in the way he avoided sugar, but still tasted everything too carefully. She found his cologne in her sweater. She caught herself wearing it longer before washing. This wasn't part of the plan. And worst of all, she no longer cared. Their marriage was still a contract on paper. But somewhere between the rooftop kiss and the key he left for her, in case it started to feel real, Avery had stopped playing a part. She didn't need to remember her lines anymore. Because the woman she used to be, the one who survived through performance, was gone. And in her place was someone who smiled without rehearsing, laughed without apology, and ached when he wasn't there. Graham had started calling her Aves. Never in front of others. Only in passing, softly, casually, like the nickname had always belonged to her. Aves, don't forget the board dinner Thursday. Aves, the investor dinner's optional, but I'd rather not go alone. Aves, are you okay? You're too quiet tonight. Each time he said it, something inside her unraveled a little more. One night, she found herself alone in the penthouse kitchen, barefoot, staring at a bottle of wine she didn't remember opening. It was past midnight. Graham was still at the office. She knew because he had texted her. Long night. Don't wait up. I'll be in late. But she was waiting anyway. Because somewhere along the way, she'd started hoping. And hope was far more dangerous than love. Hope meant you still believed he might choose you when there was no reason left to pretend. When the elevator dinged sometime, after 1 a.m., she didn't move. She listened to the quiet click of his shoes across the marble floor, the soft creak of him setting his briefcase down. And then, Aves, his voice low, like he wasn't sure she'd still be awake. She turned toward him. He looked tired. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie undone. He looked less like Graham Blackwell, the CEO, and more like a man just trying to keep his world from unraveling. "You're up," he said. "I couldn't sleep." He stepped closer, then closer still. And when he reached her, he didn't speak. He just wrapped his arms around her slowly, gently, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Avery melted into him before she could think. No words, no strategy, just breath, and closeness, and the quiet between them humming like a live wire. "I hate that this is ending," he whispered. She closed her eyes. "It doesn't have to. You know how this works." "Do I?" He pulled back enough to look at her. "You think I'm not scared of this? You think I don't want to rip up that contract and just say, screw it, I'm in?" "Then do it," she said. "Say it. But he didn't. He looked away. And in that silence, her heart fractured again. Because she realized something awful. She wasn't pretending anymore, but he still was. Or maybe he didn't know how to stop. The next morning, she found the contract on the dining table. Page 7 highlighted. The marriage will be dissolved on the 1-year anniversary unless both parties sign an extension. Next to it, a sticky note in his handwriting. 3 months left. Just tell me what you want, Aves. She stared at it for a long time. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because she didn't know if he was ready to hear it. Later that evening, she met with her friend Julia for drinks, the first real conversation outside the Blackwell world in months. Julia studied her like a stranger. You look different. Avery smiled. I feel not like myself. In a bad way? Avery thought for a moment. In an undone way. Julia sipped her cocktail. Are you in love with him? I wasn't supposed to be. That's not an answer. Avery stirred her drink. Ice clinking, silence stretching. It's not supposed to be this hard, she finally said. No, Julia replied. It's supposed to be harder when it's real. That night, Avery lay in the guest room of the penthouse, unable to sleep. She could hear him moving in the room next door, could hear the quiet clink of glass, the soft murmur of a voicemail replayed. And suddenly she couldn't take it anymore. She walked down the hallway and opened his door without knocking. Graham turned, startled, shirt off, standing by the bed with a look that flickered somewhere between concern and longing. Aves? She stepped in, slowly. I don't want to sleep in a room down the hall anymore. He didn't move. You know what that means. It means, I want you, she said. Not the performance, not the illusion, just you. A beat passed. Then he crossed the room and kissed her, not like a man in love with an image, but like a man desperate to be known, to be seen, to be hers. She had promised herself not to fall in love. But here she was, heart unrecognizable, past self a ghost, future uncertain. Because Graham Blackwell was never supposed to be her home. And now, she couldn't remember who she had been before she walked through his door. Graham Blackwell had always been good at endings. He ended bad partnerships before they turned toxic. He ended failing projects the second numbers dipped. He ended relationships cleanly, efficiently, without guilt. But standing in the middle of his penthouse living room, watching Avery move around barefoot in one of his button-downs, humming softly as she watered the plants neither of them ever remembered buying. He couldn't remember how to end this. Because for the first time, he didn't want to. The contract said 12 months. They had already passed month 9. 90 days, that's what was left. That's all that remained between pretend and goodbye. And somehow it felt like trying to hold water in his hands. Every morning she woke up next to him, skin warm, breath even, he felt it slipping more. And every night she smiled like this was safe. He hated the man who wrote that contract. Because that man had no idea what he'd lose. He noticed the shift one evening during a dinner with investors. They were seated beside each other, hands brushing, laughter shared, nothing unusual. But at one point, when the room burst into polite applause over a charity Graham had just pledged $2 million to, Avery leaned over and whispered, "You're a better man than you want people to know." He froze. Because that wasn't part of the role. That wasn't scripted. That was her seeing him. And suddenly, he was terrified. That night, he lay beside her in bed, unmoving. She was already asleep, one hand curled loosely on his chest, her leg tangled over his. She slept like she trusted him, like she believed this wouldn't break her. He stared at the ceiling. His empire had weathered scandals, recessions, betrayal, but nothing had ever made him feel vulnerable. Until this woman walked into his life pretending to be his wife and somehow became everything he didn't know he wanted. And now he didn't know how to keep her without asking her to stay. The next morning, he brought her coffee the way she liked it. Extra cinnamon, touch of oat milk, no lid. She hated the plastic taste. She smiled sleepily. You always remember. He sat beside her on the balcony, watching the city wake up below them. I remember a lot of things I shouldn't. She looked at him, curious. He kept his gaze on the horizon. You were only supposed to be temporary, he said softly. Avery's smile faltered. I know. But now I don't know how to go back to the version of my life that didn't include you in it. She didn't respond. Because what do you say to the man you love when he finally admits he's scared of losing you but still hasn't asked you to stay? Later that week, she found him in his home office, standing alone, staring at the framed contract. He didn't hear her come in. You hate that thing, she said. He glanced back, startled, smiled faintly. I do. Then why is it still on the wall? Because I'm afraid if I take it down, I'll forget how we started. Maybe forgetting is the only way we get to start over. He looked at her like she had just offered him a map out of a maze he'd built himself. But he didn't move, didn't take the frame down, just whispered. I don't know how to be with someone without rules. Avery stepped toward him. Then maybe we write new ones. But Graham knew better. People like him didn't get second chances. They built fortresses out of structure, contracts, non-disclosure agreements. And Avery? She was soft in the places he'd been trained to ignore. She loved like a storm, quiet, steady, but powerful enough to level everything if you let her in. And he had let her in. Now he didn't know how to lock the door again. That weekend, they took a rare day off. Avery had insisted no phones, no laptops, no Blackwell Holdings. Just a drive up the coast. Just air and music and silence. She played her favorite songs, sang along. He didn't know half the lyrics, but he watched her anyway. She looked more alive out there than she ever had at any gala. And for the first time, Graham imagined what life could be if they weren't bound by contracts or timelines. A Sunday morning with her in his kitchen. A future without the countdown. A life that didn't require pretending. But the minute he imagined it, it terrified him. Because love was a risk he didn't know how to insure. That night, while she slept, Graham sat at the dining table with a pen in hand. He stared at the contract again, page 7, the clause about extending it, about choosing to continue. He circled it. Then he crossed it out. Then circled it again. His hand trembled. Not from indecision. From the weight of what it would mean to ask her to stay without giving her something real. Because she wouldn't settle for a maybe. And she deserved more than a man too afraid to love her without a contract. The next morning, he stood at the window while she made breakfast. Pancakes, messy, imperfect, not at all like her usual ordered self. She danced a little while, flipping them, and he thought, God, I love her. He hadn't said it out loud yet, but it lived in his chest like something that wouldn't stop growing. And maybe soon, he'd say it. Maybe. But for now, he just whispered, Aves? Yeah? Would you still be here if there was no contract? She paused, then looked at him over her shoulder with a softness that shattered him. I already am. The truth was, Graham Blackwell didn't believe in losing. Not in courtrooms. Not in business. Not in relationships. Because he never played games he couldn't control. He never bet on feelings he couldn't quantify. He never let anyone close enough to become a weakness. Until Avery. Now, she was the only part of his life that didn't follow a projection model. And he was quietly, completely terrified. It started with a missed text. She'd gone to meet her brother for dinner, something she did every few weeks, but she always told him when she was home. That night, nothing. He told himself she was just tired. Maybe her phone died. But by midnight, when he'd already checked the guest room, the balcony, and every unread email, the unease had settled deep in his chest like a splinter he couldn't dig out. He didn't want to be this version of himself. Didn't want to care so much. But she had cracked him open. Quietly, slowly, completely. And now he didn't know how to breathe without her near. When she returned, just past 12:40 a.m., Graham was still in the living room. Suit jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled, whiskey glass untouched. Waiting? You didn't call, he said without looking at her. She froze in the doorway. I didn't think I needed to. He turned, and there it was again, that flash of vulnerability he hated showing her. You always do. Graham. I thought something had happened. Avery's expression softened. She stepped forward, dropping her purse on the side table. My phone died. I stayed late with Jamie. He's struggling with the business. I didn't think that I'd care? He cut in, voice sharp. That I'd wait up, pacing like a fool while imagining you walking away from this without a word? She stared at him, stunned. You think I'd leave you like that? I think I'm not used to needing someone like I need you, he said, quieter now, and that makes me dangerous. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps. Then say it, she whispered. Say what we both already know. He didn't blink. I love you. There it was. The thing he'd been too careful, too proud, too afraid to say. And now that it was out in the air, it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like freedom. She didn't cry. She didn't say it back immediately. She just wrapped her arms around his waist and held him tighter than she ever had. Because the man who never broke rules had just broken the only one that mattered. He gave her the one thing he didn't know how to take back. But love, Graham learned, was not an antidote to fear. It only raised the stakes. Because 3 days later, Avery was offered a promotion in London. Full relocation package. 6-figure bonus. A role she had once dreamed of, back before she ever stepped into his world. She found the offer letter on her desk at the office, delivered with a sleek envelope and a note from the executive board. Your contract ends in 10 weeks. If you're ready to build your own legacy, we're ready to support it. She sat with the letter for an hour before telling him. Graham didn't react the way she expected. He didn't beg. Didn't raise his voice. He simply folded the letter and said, Congratulations. She searched his face, desperate for something else, anger, jealousy, anything that might prove he wasn't as calm as he looked. That's it? What do you want me to say? I want you to tell me not to go. He met her eyes then, gaze hard. And if I do, will you stay? Or will you resent me for the rest of your life? She didn't answer. Because she didn't know, and that terrified her even more than the thought of leaving. The days that followed were hollow. They moved around each other like ghosts, like lovers on opposite sides of a war neither of them started. They still ate dinner together, still shared a bed. But the silence between them had grown so loud it drowned out everything else. 10 weeks. 10 weeks until the contract expired. 10 weeks until London called. 10 weeks until one of them broke. One night, Graham found her asleep on the couch, laptop open beside her. She had been writing something, a resignation letter, maybe, or a goodbye he wasn't meant to see. He didn't touch her. He just sat on the floor beside her and whispered, "I never wanted to fall in love with you, but I did." She stirred. "Then tell me what happens now." "Now," he said, voice breaking for the first time in years, "now I either fight for you or I let you go before it hurts worse." Avery opened her eyes, looked at him like he was already halfway gone. "I don't want to leave." "But you might." She nodded, slowly. "But not because I don't love you." He swallowed hard. "Then stay." Silence. Then. "Ask me again. Not because of the contract. Not because of the cameras. Just ask me." He took her hand. "Avery Monroe, will you stay because you want to, not because you have to?" Her voice cracked. "Yes." And that yes wasn't a promise. It was a beginning. One without rules. One without expiration dates. And for the first time in his life, Graham Blackwell didn't need control. He just needed her. Avery had packed the night before. Not because she had made a decision, but because the not deciding had begun to suffocate her. Her suitcase sat in the hallway, half-zipped, filled with winter coats she wouldn't need in London, and the blue sweater he loved on her that she told herself she wouldn't take, but folded anyway. She didn't know what kind of woman packed and stayed. She only knew she couldn't breathe in the in-between anymore. And Graham? He hadn't said a word about it. He moved around her like he was walking on broken glass, careful, distant, afraid that anything he said might send her running or staying for the wrong reason. But he watched her. Always. Like if he memorized her one more time, maybe he wouldn't forget the shape of her if she left. 10 weeks had become 2. 14 days until the contract expired. 14 days until their story, carefully constructed and dangerously real, either turned into something permanent or ended for good. He didn't know what she'd decide. But he knew what he had to do. Because if she left without knowing the whole truth, he'd never forgive himself. It started with a box. Small, wooden, locked. She found it one morning on the kitchen table with a note in his handwriting. "You once asked what I would have done if we hadn't signed the contract. Open this and I'll show you." The key sat beside it, cool, silver, heavy with silence. She hesitated before turning it. Inside were photos, notes, things she hadn't known he'd kept. A printout of the first press article where she was introduced as Mrs. Blackwell. A napkin from the gala where they'd first kissed. A ticket stub from the charity event they'd skipped, choosing instead to walk by the pier and talk for hours. And beneath all of it, folded with precision, was a second contract. 1 page, typed. Unsigned. Titled simply, Proposal. She scanned it once. Then again. Then sat down, legs weak beneath her. It read, "This is not a binding contract. This is a choice, a real one, without clauses or performance or cameras. I, Graham Blackwell, offer no financial compensation, no PR coverage, no shares or assets. I offer only this: a home with me, a life where you're not pretending, a love that I was too proud to admit I didn't know how to give until you taught me. If you stay, it will not be perfect. I will still be stubborn, still mess things up, still try to solve problems with power instead of patience. But I will love you in the open. I will choose you without contracts. And if you walk away, I will never chase you. But I will never forget the woman who made me want to be worth staying for. Avery didn't cry. Not yet. She just sat with it. A different kind of contract, the one they should have written first. He was waiting on the balcony. Not in a suit, not with rehearsed words. Just in a hoodie, hands in his pockets, face open and finally unguarded. She stepped out. Held the paper in both hands. This is real. Only if you want it to be. No expiration date? Just one rule, he said. No pretending. Avery stepped forward until their foreheads touched. I don't want London, she whispered. Not if it means leaving this behind. Then don't. You always said people like you don't get second chances. Then let's not waste our first one. He kissed her then. No pressure, no performance. Just presence. And she felt something settle inside her for the first time in months. Not butterflies, not fire. Peace. Later that week, the press caught wind of her turning down the promotion. Speculation ran wild. Some said it was a scandal. Some said she was pregnant. Others said Graham had locked her down for good. She didn't correct them. Because the truth was, no one needed to understand this, but the two of them. They still had dinners, still attended events, still played the part, but now there was no script. Just glances that meant we made it, and touches that said this is ours now. And when the contract's end date came and went, neither of them noticed. Because the lie had ended long ago, and everything after had been theirs alone. In a quiet moment, weeks later, Avery asked, "When did you know?" Know what? That it wasn't fake anymore. Graham smiled without looking up from his book. The first time I woke up and didn't want to check my calendar to see how many days were left. She reached for his hand. There's no countdown now. He laced his fingers with hers. Just the rest of our lives. There was no ceremony. No white dress. No violins swelling over a mountain of rose petals. The second time they said yes to each other, it happened on a Tuesday. In the kitchen. Over coffee and mismatched mugs. Avery had forgotten to start the machine that morning, and Graham, who once considered caffeine a strategic asset, not a comfort, was trying to work the buttons like it was a bomb about to detonate. She walked in, barefoot and half asleep. You're going to break it. He glanced at her. It's broken already. Why does it beep at me when I didn't even touch anything yet? She came up behind him, reached around, and hit 2 buttons. The beeping stopped. The machine hissed to life. Magic, he muttered. She smirked, kissed the corner of his jaw. Say it. Say what? That you'd fall apart without me. I'd manage, he deadpanned. Then, after a pause, but I'd be very caffeinated and very miserable. They never tore up the original contract. They didn't need to. Because now it sat in a drawer beside utility bills and expired warranties, just a relic of something that once mattered. A blueprint for a house they had long since stopped building. The real home was already here. In the apartment. In the way she always left the bedroom window cracked, even when he complained about the draft. In the way he never touched her phone but always knew when she needed him to pull her away from it. In the Sunday mornings where nothing happened, no meetings, no headlines, no drama, and everything still felt full. People asked questions. Of course they did. The board wanted to know why their strategic partnership hadn't ended with the deadline. The press speculated endlessly. Are they still pretending? Did they really fall in love? Was it all just PR that spiraled into something real? But Avery had stopped answering. So had Graham. Because this belonged to them. 6 months after the contract expired, they moved out of the penthouse. Not because they had to. Because they wanted something smaller. Something that didn't echo every time she laughed. Something with a real kitchen, where he could burn pancakes on Sunday and she could tease him for weeks after. Their new place had creaky floors and terrible parking. It was perfect. One night, while unpacking, Avery found the second contract, the one Graham had written in quiet desperation before she decided to stay. She sat on the floor, legs crossed, and reread it. Still just one page. Still unsigned. She brought it to him, held it up like a dare. Should I frame this? He looked over at her from the couch, hair still damp from a shower, reading glasses sliding down his nose. Only if you add a clause at the bottom. What kind? Something about never being allowed to leave even if I burn the coffee. Tempting, she said, then paused. But no clauses. No conditions. Then just sign it, he said, smiling. Make it yours. She grabbed a pen from the counter and wrote one word at the bottom. Not her name. Just, yes. Years later, when someone asked them at a dinner party, half drunk and curious, "So, how did you two meet?" Graham would smirk, sip his whiskey, and say, "She married me for money." And Avery would raise her eyebrow, lean in, and reply, "He bribed me with immunity and a penthouse." Everyone would laugh. But they never told the whole story. Not the truth behind it. Not the lonely nights. Not the first kiss that didn't feel staged. Not the moment she almost walked away. Because what they had now wasn't about how it started. It was about how they stayed. Graham Blackwell had spent most of his life writing contracts to protect himself. But the only agreement that ever mattered was the one without terms. The one where she stayed, not because she had to, but because she chose him. Every morning, every messy, imperfect, coffee-stained morning. And Avery? She stopped measuring herself in deadlines and precision. She stopped needing to perform, to earn her place in someone's world. Because in this world, his world, she was already enough. Not the perfect wife. Not the fake one. Just hers. Just his. Just real.